Messages appearing on cold walls, scrawled in a frantic, childish hand. One plea surfacing while investigators watched in real time, asked for a mercy that never came. "Marianne, please help me." This wasn't just a story. This message manifested in front of the very eyes of those gathering data at Borley Rectory. Because history isn't just written in books, it is etched into the very masonry of the places we inhabit. There are locations across the British Isles where the walls don't just provide shelter. They provide a record of secrets, of sudden ends, and of the agonizing moments where the living were discarded and forgotten. Tonight, we investigate 5 of the most iconic hauntings in the ledger, cases where the stone refuses to stay silent, here in
The Witness Ledger.
Entry number 025, location, Raynham Hall, Norfolk, UK. Date, September 19th, 1936. Subject, photographic evidence of apparition. The camera captured the light, the hallway holds the rest. In the world of the unexplained, some witnesses are ignored, but a camera is harder to silence. On September 19th, 1936, 2 photographers for Country Life magazine were documenting the grand staircase of Raynham Hall. As they prepared their flash, one of them, Captain Provand, spotted a vapory form, gradually taking the shape of a woman in a brown brocade dress. He shouted to his assistant to fire the flash. The result was the most famous ghost photograph in history. A translucent, shrouded figure descending the oak stairs. But the Ledger isn't just interested in the film. We are interested in the woman behind the shroud. She was Lady Dorothy Walpole, the Brown Lady. Legend tells of a woman locked away in a room of the hall by her vengeful husband, forbidden from seeing her children until her death in 1726. Witnesses across centuries, including King George IV and the novelist Frederick Marryat, described her as a pale, glowing figure with a terrifying detail. Where her eyes should have been, there were only empty, dark sockets. Marryat was so unnerved by the sight that he fired a revolver point blank at the apparition. The bullet passed straight through her, lodging in the door behind. She didn't flinch. She simply vanished. Some secrets are too heavy for a grave to hold. Sometimes the stone just isn't enough. Entry number 026. Location, Wootton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire, UK. Date, multi-century archive. Subject, demonic manifestation. The past doesn't always stay in the past. In the quiet market town of Wootton-under-Edge sits a building that seems to exhale the weight of 1,000 years. The ancient Ram Inn isn't just a house, it's a crossroads. Built in 1145 on the intersection of 2 ancient ley lines that supposedly lead straight to Stonehenge, the inn sits atop a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground. The late owner, John Humphreys, claimed that on his very first night in the house in 1968, he was grabbed by an invisible force and dragged across the room by his arm. He spent the next several decades documenting a darkness that refused to leave, from the witch's room to the skeletal remains of children found beneath the staircase, buried with broken daggers. Some places don't just hold onto the past, they broadcast it. The Ram Inn is a dead zone for comfort. Witnesses describe a thickness in the air that mimics a physical weight on the chest. Whether it is the succubus that haunts the upper floor or the high strangeness of the bishop's room, the Ram Inn serves as a reminder. When you build on top of the old world eventually finds a way up through the floorboards. Some foundations are built on more than just stone, some are built on screams. Entry number 027. Location: Chillingham Castle, Northumberland, UK. Date: 1920s. Subject: luminous apparition. Walls hold secrets too. Chillingham Castle is often cited as the most haunted stronghold in England, but its most famous resident isn't a shadow, it's a light. For generations, guests staying in the Pink Room reported a terrifying sequence of events. As the clock struck midnight, a brilliant, flickering blue flash would illuminate the room, followed by the sight of a young boy dressed in blue silk standing at the foot of the bed. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He simply glowed with a sickly, ethereal light before fading into the 10-foot thick stone walls of the castle. For years, the Blue Boy was dismissed as a collective hallucination, until the wall itself gave up its secret. During a 1920s renovation of the Pink Room, workmen broke into a hollow space behind the stone. There, they found the skeletal remains of a young boy and fragments of blue cloth. Most chillingly, the stone around his fingers was worn smooth, as if he had spent his final hours clawing at the rock in total darkness. Once the remains were given a proper Christian burial, the Blue Boy stopped appearing. But to this day, guests in the Pink Room report a sudden, inexplicable blue shimmer in the air, a visual echo of a light that should have gone out centuries ago. Sometimes the things that seem strange and frightening pale in comparison to the reality of the cruelty of human nature. One can barely begin to imagine the terror that poor boy must have endured in his final moments, sealed alive into the very fabric of the house. We look into the dark for monsters, but we forget that the most terrifying things in the ledger were often put there by human hands. Stone remembers, and sometimes it tries to tell you exactly where the bodies are buried. Entry number 028. Location: Pluckley, Kent, UK. Date: ongoing. Subject: multi-entity manifestation. The ledger remains open. In the village of Pluckley, the veil between what was and what is has become dangerously thin. With 12 officially documented hauntings, it is a landscape saturated with the past. But perhaps the most visceral entry in the ledger is the Screaming Man of the local brickworks. Witnesses over the decades have reported a blood-curdling scream echoing from the site of the old clay pits, a sound so human and so filled with agony that it stops people in their tracks. It is the voice of a brickworker who, in the 18th century, was reportedly buried alive when a massive wall of clay collapsed onto him. There was no time for rescue, only the sound of a voice being snuffed out by the earth. As a witness who documents the high strangeness of our countryside, I find myself returning to the stone tape theory. Could the iron-rich clay of the Pluckley pits have acted as a recording device? If the theory holds, this isn't a sentient ghost seeking peace. It is a playback, a traumatic vibration locked into the very minerals of the ground, triggered by a change in the air or a certain atmospheric pressure. It reminds us that our environment isn't just a backdrop, it's a witness. It absorbs our screams, and when the conditions are right, it plays them back to the living. Be careful where you walk. You never know what the ground is still holding on to. Entry number 029. Location: Borley, Essex, UK. Date: 1920 to 1944. Archive. Subject: residual haunting. Some things are bricked up for a reason. Our final entry for this investigation takes us to a patch of desolate land in Essex, where a house once stood that was so plagued by the dead it became a global sensation. Borley Rectory was built in 1862, but its shadows were far older. The most famous resident was the Phantom Nun, a sorrowful figure seen by dozens of witnesses, including 4 of the rector's daughters, simultaneously. She was often seen gliding along a specific path in the garden, head bowed in prayer. Legend tells of a 13th century nun who attempted to elope with a monk from a nearby monastery. They were caught, and while the monk was executed, the nun was purportedly bricked up alive within the walls of the convent. For centuries, she has walked the nun's walk, a path so frequently trodden by her spirit that witnesses claimed a visible groove had been worn into the grass. But Borley wasn't just about sightings. It was a site of violent physical glitches. Stones were thrown by unseen hands, bells rang in empty rooms, and most famously, messages began to appear on the walls, scrawled in a frantic, childish hand. One message, appearing as the investigators watched, pleaded simply, "Marianne, please help me." When the rectory finally burned to the ground in a mysterious fire, the owner claimed to see 2 ghostly figures in the flames. And years later, during an excavation of the cellar, a skull was found. The remains of a young woman buried beneath the very spot where the hauntings were most intense. Whether it was the stone tape replaying a 13th century tragedy or a genuine sentient spirit reaching out from the dark, Borley serves as a warning. Some places are so saturated with trauma that even fire cannot cleanse them. The house is gone, but the nun's walk remains, and some say so does she. Walls can be rebuilt, but some things are bricked up for a reason. Five icons of the British landscape. 5 locations where the stone hasn't just witnessed history, it has absorbed it. From the empty eye sockets of the brown lady to the frantic reaching hand of the blue boy, these cases remind us that trauma leaves a footprint. We look at ancient walls and see shelter, but for some, those same walls became a shroud. Whether it is a stone tape replaying a moment of terror, or a soul that simply refuses to be forgotten, the evidence suggests that the places we live are never truly empty. But the records for the ancient Ram Inn don't end here. This site is too dense, its history too blood-soaked to be contained in a single entry. The deeper we dug into the ledger, the more the shadows refused to stay silent. For the full investigation into the bishop's room, the ritual remains beneath the stairs, and more about the Ram Inn. Look for case 026, Expansion, the ancient Ram Inn, coming to the archive soon. Be careful which walls you lean against. Some of them are still holding onto a heartbeat. I'll see you in the next archive of
The Witness Ledger.